What was it like growing up in New York as a Chinese?
I have to say, there was probably a distinct advantage because I've met many other people who were Chinese and grew up in remote areas, like, well, I don't say remote. Ohio is not remote. Michigan is not remote. Nebraska, remote areas. And their complaint was that there was absolutely nobody they could identify with. Well, at least in New York, we always had a vibrant Chinatown. During my lifetime, Chinatown was small. It was just really the village transferred overseas. It was roughly about 5 blocks, and that had grown from before World War II when it was only about 2 or 3 blocks. And it was at least a place where you could always walk around and know that this was safe for you, home, that you were accepted there. And you usually had relatives there, people who you knew, and frequently people who had the same last name. Most of the time, though, I grew up outside of Chinatown proper, so I was on the Lower East Side, the Upper West Side, Queens. But when we moved to Queens in the late 1950s, we were one of the first 2 or 3 Chinese families to move to the section of Queens that my parents moved to, which was Jackson Heights. So I have to say, when everything is said and done, New York was probably good because there were so many different people from so many different places in the world. Everybody could identify with being from someplace else and identify still with having a family member that was an immigrant of Europe.
Did you experience racism growing up, and how did you deal with it?
Yes, I mean, we have to remember that until the signing of the Civil Rights Acts in 1964, it was quite common for people to say, European Americans, no, sorry, you can't come in here, this is restricted, this is whites only. And people would say, oh no, we can't rent to you, this is a restricted apartment building, no Jews, no Negroes, no Orientals, no single women. All the time. Part of the racism was overt. There was generally people screaming, you know, negative epithets and things like that. And some of it was unconscious. Some people, really deeply entrenched racism is where people don't even think it's an issue. They just accept the fact that other groups are inferior. So, but that's part of the mix in New York City. Everybody's divided up into different groups, and generally every group is sort of culturally centered on themselves. So it's hard to find a group that doesn't actually think of themselves as superior to everybody else, and the result is you come across a lot of comments and a lot of kinds of things like that in New York. But I was asked to leave a public beach once that was around the Coney Island side that had been a restricted beach when I was about 13. Several times I ran into situations where I lost a job because frankly they didn't want to hire somebody who wasn't white. So, but before 1964, there was nothing you could do about it. The law hadn't changed yet. Francisco.